and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Earlier this week, as many as 25 CRPF personnel were killed by the Naxals in the Sukma district of Chhattisgarh. The casualties have only mounted since the attack in Dantewada in 2010, which saw as many as 75 CRPF personnel being killed. What then is the way forward? How does India handle this problem? Do we need a softer approach or is a harder line needed? And also, why are some states better at handling this, say as Andhra Pradesh, than say a Chhattisgarh? Joining me on the round table is Professor Kamal Mitra Chenoy. He's a professor of politics at JNU. I have Commodore Uday Bhaskar, a defense expert and a director in Society for Policy Studies. There's Mr. Prakash Singh, he's a former DG BSF, and Ajai Shukla, a defense expert and the strategic affairs editor for Business Standard. Mr. Singh, I'm going to begin with you first. What then is the way forward? How does India proceed?
You see, the geographical area under Maoist influence has shrunk from over 200 to now just about 116. A number of Central Committee and Politburo members have been neutralized, either arrested or killed in engagements. Then the level of violence, in terms of figures, it has come down. But of course, in a counter-insurgency, please remember that ups and downs are bound to be there. And one setback does not mean that you have lost control over the situation.
But a setback of such proportions?
Well, it is definitely a setback, that is conceded. But if you go through the Maoist own documents, they admit that they are in the stage of what they call tactical retreat. And they admit that they have suffered setbacks in the recent past. And they also emphasize the need to undertake some spectacular actions to sort of demonstrate that yes, they are alive and kicking. So all this is figuring in their discussions and in their documents. So I would not say that situation is really bad, but the point is, why should even Sukma have happened? That is the big point. And I'm convinced that this was an avoidable disaster, avoidable on a number of counts. You see, the point is, the CRPF road patrolling party was there. Last month, on the 11th of March, a similar road patrolling party was ambushed. And it was not ambushed, but there was an IED explosion in which 12 people died. It was imperative that you should have been extra cautious in whatever operations you were undertaking. That is point number one. Point number two, see the kind of assistance, cooperation, collaboration between the state police and the CRPF is just not there. Now we have heard 25 people killed. How is it that we have not heard about even injury to a state police personnel? It's amazing. It only shows that they are not involving themselves in whatever exercises, operations the CRPF is undertaking, or their presence and involvement is so very nominal that one or two, three people were there and they managed to save their lives, something like that. Next point, you see, you say that 300 Maoists attacked them. Whether it is 200 or 300, it is a sizable number.
Right. And
200, 300 people were not para-dropped. They were in the jungle. They must have been assembled at a place or in an area. And this assembly would have involved a lot of movement during the last 1 week.
Intelligence failure.
During the last 1 week. No, not only intelligence failure, it is the total administrative failure. You see, intelligence is the state intelligence and IB. Now, IB is not so intensive on the ground in
administrative failure, okay.
Administrative. I mean, you have sarpanch, you have a block development officer, you have subdivisional magistrates, you have a circle officer, and you have medical officer. I mean, the entire administrative paraphernalia is there, and it is incumbent on anyone, if he notices such massive movement of Maoist guerrillas, to have informed the nearest, whatever actionable unit.
Let me bring in Ajai
so the this kind of intelligence vacuum, just vacuum is inexcusable.
So Ajay, can I bring you in on this conversation also? Is this situation not so pessimistic then?
There's no doubt that over the last 4 or 5 years, Naxal capacity has been greatly whittled down. It started from states like Andhra and Telangana and then spread to others, Odisha and so on. Chhattisgarh remains an area where the Naxals still remain very strong, and this is a commentary on the inability of the Chhattisgarh government and the police forces to actually do something on the ground. Now, as Mr. Prakash Singh brought out, the state's administrative infrastructure, the village level functionaries, the punches, the other ones at a higher level, they should be feeding back information. But in any insurgency-affected area, the local population essentially is constantly making calculations about which side is likely to win. And when it appears that the Naxals are stronger, that the Naxals are able to overcome and carry out their operations despite the best attempts of the state, there will be a great reluctance on the part of the people and also of the administrative machinery to feed back the information, to feed back measures, to put in place the development that is needed to sort of win the larger battle against the Maoists. In that, there's been a serious problem in Chhattisgarh state itself. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no real assessment from the center, no hard questions asked of the Raman Singh government about why they are not being able to do it, as a result of which the police continues to function weakly, the CRPF continues to be thrown out into the field. The CRPF itself is seriously lacking in junior leadership and tactical leadership. And as it turns out, they didn't have a DG in place for 50 days. So given the circumstances, it's not surprising actually that such things happen.
Which is, Professor Chenoy, some states are more successful. I mean, he answered that partly. What did Andhra do perhaps, to handle it better?
Well, you know what Andhra did, and they actually looked back at the police action on Telangana, because some things were similar. For example, who do you back, the state or in that case the rebels? And they had more or less chalked out a program. And also when it first hit Srikakulam, the Maoist movement, the police had time to watch it and figure out what to do when it moved further into Telangana. Secondly, as it happened, there were a number of policemen in the force who were ex-army and who were hunters. And so what they did was they got their trackers. They were given a special allowance by the government to get their own trackers, and they broke these groups up, and they didn't allow a large consolidated group to gather. But even then, the pincer attacks were done, and there were losses, and policemen were also killed. But whatever they learned was disseminated outside Andhra. What I found in Sukma when I went some years ago in connection with Narega was that people were very scared, because if they spoke to the police, some villager to get some benefit would tell the Maoists. Right. And if they went and saw the Maoists, someone would tell the police. So, it's even, it's like Ajay said, but even worse in the sense that you sometimes to talk to both sides. And there was just not enough administration or administrators who were tough. They tend to move away from their position if there was a perceived Maoist threat. I'm talking of perceived, may not have actually been there. Also, some of the tougher police officers were, in a sense, too tough. Like, for example, the IG Kaluri, who was using the SPOs, turned Maoists, with fairly good effect, but in that, because of a common name, etc., civilians also got killed. And so the pressure mounted to remove him. No replacement for him has been found.
You see, about the success of undivided Andhra state, there were three things we have to remember. One was the Greyhound force which they raised. It is an example for other states, and the Home Ministry have in fact recommended that other states, at least 6 states have been advised to raise similar forces. And I had occasion to visit different districts of Andhra Pradesh when I was entrusted with an inquiry into the attempted assassination of Chandrababu Naidu, and I went to most of the districts. And there I learned one thing remarkable, that whenever the Greyhound force moved, if Naxals were anywhere in the area, they would just clear out. They would run away. They were scared of Greyhounds, and they knew that they cannot take on the Greyhounds. That was the awe, the fear, and the impact of the Greyhounds. That is point number one. Point number two, they developed a fantastic intelligence network. Fantastic. I think and it continues to this day. You see, today the SIB of Telangana, it was SIB Andhra then, they are able to feed intelligence to Orissa, they are able to feed intelligence to even Delhi, they are able to feed intelligence to distant states, not only cover their own state. 3, the district officers, the superintendents of police and the district magistrates, they introduced a number of innovative schemes. They were involved in sort of winning hearts and minds, so to say.
So administration needs to play a bigger, more proactive role, it seems to be.
You know, I'd like to add to what the other panelists have said, Priya, and to me, having studied the Andhra case in some detail, apart from what Mr. Prakash Singh has identified, to me what was very critical, I think, was the all-party consensus in the undivided Andhra. Mr. Chandrababu Naidu, as the Chief Minister, he was able to, I think, appreciate the scale of the challenge in relation to development. I mean, if you remember his tenure, his investment in Hyderabad, trying to make it the equivalent of a destination, and we are talking about the early and mid-90s. And my reading was that he was able to get a certain consensus so that this issue did not get politicized. And there I think we had a very, very positive contribution by the professionals, particularly the IPS officers who were in the undivided state. I just want to add one line to what Kamal said. He spoke about the need for the local officials to be tough. I think that needs to be slightly qualified. My reading again of Orissa and Andhra in the mid-90s when we were studying this as a subject for internal security, the citizen wants a fair administration. Whether it is the collector, the revenue official, the policeman, they must be seen to be fair. And unfortunately, I think the tribal in India has been let down by the state. I'm making a slightly, shall we say, broad brush statement. But if you look at the status of the tribal across India, my sort of broad submission is that the state has abdicated from the constitutional provision, which was there in the 2 schedules. And I think if this could be revisited and we have a sense of fairness, and the governor of each state, particularly where the problem is as acute as it is able to, I think, make an appropriate intervention by getting the tribal councils going and complementing the state effort. I think that would make a little difference. And second is to add to what Mr. Prakash Singh said, my reading is the Andhra experience has not been adequately, I think, taken on board by the other states. For instance, Chhattisgarh. And we have discussed this in many seminars saying that the specific kind of SOPs which were followed, he mentioned intelligence. There are a range of other issues that in the event of an attack, what are the first things you do and so on. Again, it's perhaps a bit early to make any definitive judgment. I'm sure the CRPF will do an internal investigation. But it appears that there were many tactical lapses in what happened on the 24th of April. And a final point, in terms of the way ahead, because I think that's what the whole country is now saying, what do we do next? I have long felt that how do we motivate the IPS, and we have a very senior IPS officer sitting here, to really be able to deal with the internal security challenge. And what I'm saying is based on my interviews and conversations with very junior CRPF officials. Now everyone around this table knows the CRPF, while it is ostensibly the lead police force for internal security, you talk to a local CRPF man, very often you find them on stations with their bedroll and their bag trunks. They are called Chalte Raho Pyare Force, meaning the central government is constantly, Home Ministry, tasking them in place A, place B, place C. And I think, sir, you made the point once that there is not even enough time for training. So these are some very serious inadequacies which every senior IPS officer knows, and they say it more vocally after they retire. So my submission is that can we have a metric between the center and the state to assess the performance of IPS officers when they are in such positions? And at the risk of being, I would say, outvoted from this panel, I think the Modi government must revisit Manmohan Singh Saab's NFU, scrap the NFU for IAS, scrap the NFU for IPS, and let us have a performance-oriented kind of system as far as our civil service, our police, and frankly, every organ of state. Bring fairness back, bring integrity back, bring competence back. Maybe then we'll have some way ahead. Otherwise, we'll be mourning the death of another set of people in some other incident. I'm sorry for saying this in such a
grim note. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and carry on this conversation, so stay with us. Welcome back to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. We are here to discuss the attack in Sukma, which saw as many as 25 CRPF Jawans killed by the Naxals. Mr. Prakash Singh, we were discussing the options, but we've seen there were two. I remember this government, maybe not so much time, but in the UPA there was a Chidambaram line, and there was a line opted by somebody like Digvijay Singh and others saying we should go softer. Chidambaram was, I think, for a more harder line. What really works?
You see, I'm distressed to say that there has been no clarity at the highest levels, whether it was in the UPA government or in the NDA government. Let's talk of the UPA government first. Yeah. Shivraj Patil was the Home Minister, and in a speech 2005, he talked of Naxals being brothers and sisters and all that.
Misguided.
So whatever it is,
misguided brothers.
No, the Naxals took full advantage of this to augment their resources, build their manpower, etc. etc. Then comes Chidambaram. He had a better grip and a better understanding of the problem. But I expected him to do better in terms of laying down the strategic doctrine for dealing with the Naxal problem. With his intellectual flair, he could have done that. But he didn't do, and he just limited himself to 3 graphic words: clear, hold and develop. Well, yes. These words were very significant. What he meant was that you clear an area of Maoist guerrillas, then you establish the administration, and then follow that up by development.
Right.
So that was a 3-stage strategy which he adopted. And in pursuance of this, he sent forces to the Naxal-affected states, and the media described it as Operation Green Hunt, though there was no such operation really. Anyway, but that was his approach. But as the operations started, there were rumblings within the Congress party, and Digvijay Singh came out with a statement criticizing Chidambaram. And on one occasion when I visited the Home Ministry, I got a clear impression, though I was not taken into confidence, but I got a clear impression that the Home Ministry is in doldrums. They don't know what to do, how far to go or how far not to go, whether to hit hard or hit thus far and no further. There was tremendous amount of confusion, and this confusion got reflected through the paramilitary commanders at the ground level, at the battalion level. So, although the forces were there, but they did not know what was expected of them. That's why I said no clarity in handling. Now, when the NDA government came, we had much greater expectations, and Mr. Modi made some announcements in his Independence Day speech and otherwise. But beyond saying that, well, in Nepal, the Maoists came over ground, you should also come over ground. In Nepal, they've joined mainstream, you should also join the mainstream. And that the path to development is by taking the plow and not by taking the gun. Some things like that, he said, all first-class statements. But the point is, his statements should have been reduced to a strategic doctrine. It should have been done by the National Security Council, by the NSA, or by the Home Ministry. Somebody should have done it. Nobody has done it, with the result that almost the same policy is continuing. See, the problem today, the greatest problem is that all the states and the center are not on the same page. If you let us take of Bihar, Nitish Babu has a different approach altogether. He says no, development is the answer to Naxalism. This is what he says. And more than once, the JIC, the Joint Intelligence Committee, had to pull up JIC through the MHA. The Bihar government was pulled up that, look, we have given you forces, but why are you not utilizing it? So that is Bihar. Now, Mamata Banerjee, she blew hot and cold. First, she said she hobnobbed with the Maoists, but when her own cadre people started getting killed, then she said, no, now you go all out. And they went all out, and Jungle Mahal area was cleared.
Ajay, your take on the political line that has been taken in the past?
See, it's fashionable to criticize the Congress. And the Congress sets itself up for being criticized by openly bickering within itself. But the fact is that there is not really a great big question mark over here about whether it is development that resolves Naxal problems or the use of force. Obviously, both have to go hand in hand. It is just a question of one person making an effort in one particular direction and the other person giving a higher profile to let's say, the use of force. The problem is, we have been good at neither delivering development to the Naxal people, to the people in Naxal-affected areas, nor have we been good at the use of force. So when you have a situation like now, you're building these roads and so on, there's a huge perceptual problem in those areas. All the local people believe that these roads are being made to loot our minerals and our forest wealth and to bring in forces to suppress us. The Naxals have successfully won that perception battle. They have convinced the locals of this.
Right.
When it comes to putting in place the administrative mechanisms, they are riddled with corruption. They have the problems that Mr. Prakash Singh brought out, that they are not feeding back information. And when you actually look at the effectiveness of the use of force implements that you've done, when, you know, the greyhounds are a model for successful and counter-Naxal use of force. But the greyhounds are successful because they were ruthless in selecting people for the greyhounds. Of 10 people who appeared for or came for on probation, maybe 1 or 2 would be retained. The rest would be just told, go back to your cadre. So they ensured a certain standard. They ensured that those standards were implemented in the operations that were conducted on the ground. This is not the case with the CRPF. The CRPF has lakhs of people, but the same man who's pot-bellied individual and counter in electoral duties today will suddenly find himself doing counter-Naxal operations over there and completely outclassed by those people, the Naxals who live in the jungle, who know how to fight in the jungle. So we are sad to say we are losing on all fronts, at least in Chhattisgarh.
Which is this. Professor Chenoy, can I bring you in the political reactions?
Well, look, I want to say a couple of things about the Naxal thing in Chhattisgarh. You know, the SPOs, that is the turned Maoists, were a useful source for training or giving inputs into the CRPF and the police. That was hardly done. They were used for difficult security operations without really having the training of working as an armed force. Being a Maoist and being an armed force security officer are two different things. Secondly, they were given miserable living conditions. For example, in the Dantewada area, I went to a police station. The SPOs were sleeping against the wall. There was no cover for them. And the rooms were there for the officers. The development was linked to the so-called Salwa Judam, and there was virtually no development. So what Uday is saying is true. The Indian state and Indian civil society have let down the tribals consistently and badly for quite a long time. So to win the perceptual war, we have to really do some kind of development and through regular contact say, look, the Maoists cannot give you development. They can only give you death and a bit of, bit of support. But development only the state can give you. You know, so the propaganda war we've lost because the state government is not given, in many cases, given enough funding, is not given enough backup for its troops. Statements are made but they're not implemented, or they're implemented badly, and so a situation which could have been resolved 10 years earlier is continuing.
It's continuing. Final words.
I would say the way ahead, Priya, is that we should really have some very swift policy initiatives, and these should be across the board. As far as the CRPF is concerned, I think as a force, they need to be given greater resources and support for their training. And the way they are being deployed, I mean, people like Mr. Prakash Singh who know the force have often spoken about the way in which they are being tasked, that it is far from appropriate and not very efficient. I think training for CRPF and perhaps using the experience and the expertise of the Indian Army, which has very rich experience both in insurgency, counterinsurgency and jungle warfare, and allow some degree of specialization even within the CRPF to the extent that is possible. So definitely I would flag better training, better resources. And by the way, this is not rocket science. Task force after task force, committee after committee has said this for the last 20 years. I can recall the post-Kargil review committee when they looked at internal security and intelligence. They mentioned many of these. That was 2000, NDA 1. Wow. Now we are 2017, NDA 2. And I'm saying this very clearly and repeating this on your channel. Please revisit NFU for the Prime Minister's office and for Indian parliamentarians, that this, I think, was a flawed concept and it does not allow competence to be recognized across the board in India's civil services and in the other organs of state. And finally, I'm taking the liberty of suggesting many of our former governors, as I said, the Indian constitution had mandated that the governor of each state would have a certain degree of autonomy about tribal affairs.
Okay.
My recall is it's never been used. If so, very rarely and in an almost invisible manner. Most governors in India, I think, who have rich experience and who are not in office now, perhaps they would speak with greater candor. I think they should perhaps be encouraged to come up with some recommendations about individual states, because each state has its own, I would say, specific characteristics. But this would perhaps address the political, what I would call as lack of clarity and resolve, deal with the professionals in terms of the CRP. That might be the way ahead.
Well, on that note, we'll end now. As you can see, the solution is there. Everybody knows the answers. It's the implementation that is really the tough part over here. And everybody's hoping that this Prime Minister will at least do something, because he seems to be talking the right talk, at least on all this. So let's see what happens now. Thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again same time next week.